Thank you, Corey, and I appreciate inviting me back. Very nice. First off, I just want to give you a little background on me and why am I interested in this. As a small child, I was a coin collector, and then how I got interested in shipwreck is very easy. 20 plus years ago, I was taking care of a patient and didn't have insurance, and I just kept taking care of him. And lo and behold, one day he came in my office and laid an Atosha 8 real on my desk as a token of thank you. And that's how I got started in shipwreck. So, things happen for a reason, and I'm very grateful to that patient for showing me. Showing me, at least showing me the Atosha, which obviously is very important to all of us here in Key West. One thing I'm going to do tonight is talk about a very specific ship, the ship of gold, but throughout the talk I'm going to do some corollaries between the Atosha and the ship, which are separated obviously by 200 years. The talk tonight will be about a ship called the SS George Law, which had a name change, which I'll discuss, and talk about two specific voyages. A voyage that made a stop in Key West, the one and only stop in Key West, and then the fatal voyage that occurred about a year later. Now, as far as comparing this to the Atosha, the SS George Law really is America's first great shipwreck, where everyone knows the Atosha is from Spain. So there's not many American shipwrecks, but this is the one, so to speak. Now, talking about gold, many of you may think of the California gold rush, but the first gold rush actually occurred in North Carolina, and that was in 1799. And what was found was something like this. A 12-year-old boy, Skip, going to church, and when he was fishing, he found a 17-pound quartz and gold rock. He brought it home to his father. His father didn't know what to do with it, so he used it as a doorstop for 2 years. And then his dad brought it into town, which would be Charlotte, North Carolina. It was in the Appalachians. And then, of course, his dad got probably pennies compared to its real value. Now, when you look at this kind of a piece of treasure, and this is a recovered piece of gold from the SS George Law, you can see there is a varying amount of gold and quartz, and that is typical of these veins that are mined. This particular piece has a lot of gold in it and a very small amount of quartz, but these are very collectible, of course. The famous gold rush was obviously in California, which started about 1848 and then became famous in 1849. But for coin collectors out there, they may be aware that there were other gold rushes that occurred in Georgia and then the one in North Carolina. And we actually have mints, or had mints, excuse me, in North Carolina, in Charlotte, and in Dahlonega in Georgia. So now the thing to put this in perspective, why was a ship of this large size traveling from California every 2 weeks? It's stated that prior to 1847, the total world gold haul was about 32 tons. Not really sure how they calculated that. But by 1854, the gold out of California was 193 tons. That's 6 times the previous world gold haul. Just to put into perspective what California meant to the world. And once again, another corollary would be with the Atosha, and that would be obviously the great mountain of Potosi, which was the Silver Mountain. So let's talk a little bit about Key West and Florida. The War of 1812 really brought Florida into, perhaps some recognition as far as being a vital territory. And after the War of 1812 is when they felt Florida needed to get some attention, and they sent obviously some of the Navy down to kind of deal with some of the piracy that was going on, which we all are familiar with that. But then, a lot of the wreckers from the Northeast came down as well, because there was obviously work and salvage. So Florida became a territory in 1822, and we'll talk a little bit about lighthouses, the custom houses, and stuff that made Florida what it, in Key West, really a notable strategic location. But as everyone knows about wrecking, it really meant employment and profit for many people, especially the Key Westers. And wrecking frequency, believe it or not, was about 1 per week. So there was a lot of wrecking going on during that period. So who is George Law? Well, this is George Hellfire Law. He was also named Live Oak as a nickname. And the reason he was called, well, we know why he was called Hellfire. But Live Oak was because in his shipbuilding, he built very good ships with the best materials. Now, where was the profit in all this? He went after the mail contract to basically bring the gold back from California to New York and then on to Europe. So he was awarded a pretty lucrative contract. And that was really the lifeblood, okay, of the nation's exploding economy when this gold from California started to come. And as I described, it was in large quantities. Now, he also was under presidential command to facilitate passage, not only of freight, but of passengers. Because at that point in the 1850s, the Mississippi was pretty much the dividing line. And we needed a reliable method to go west. And the steamship did that, and it went every probably 2 weeks, 10 to 14 days would be the frequency. This is a drawing of the SS George Law. It's a side wheel paddle steamer. And I mean, obviously, the Atocha being a galleon, it's a beautifully designed ship. But a side wheel paddle steamer is pretty unique in its own right. Mid-century, 3-masted paddle steamer was a transition between sail and steam. Obviously the assistance from the sail meant that less coal needed to be burned. Now, a comparison to the Atocha was about 112 feet in length. The George Law was almost 300 feet. So with Super Bowl being last Sunday, we're basically looking at a football field in length of the ship, so quite sizable. And it was 40 feet tall, so a 4-story building as well. So pretty, you would definitely notice this ship if it came into your port, as it did in Key West. It had a speed of about 11, 12 knots. One little, obviously since the ship sank, there are only 4 lifeboats on this ship. And there would be, average 800 people on the boat. So probably not the best, but they did have enough life preservers for everybody. But it was a wooden hull with a copper sheeting. And the interesting thing, which I know about, but to point out to all of you, on the Great Seal of Florida, interestingly enough, is a side wheel paddle steamer. So obviously Florida became a state, 1845. So it's right in the period. So there you go. That's why it's on the state seal. This shows the route of the steamers, and there would be 2 steamers. There would be a steamer coming out of San Francisco, which would go to Panama, and then across the isthmus, and then another steamer would bring it to New York. But this shows the route. Now, as you can see, once they would leave Panama, they typically used Havana as their refueling port. Havana has always had that. They just have a very deep water harbor, and it has been used for centuries. On the Pacific route, you can see that there was an area in Mexico that was used. I believe that is around Acapulco. That was used perhaps for refueling as well. Now, as we know with the Atocha, getting across the Isthmus of Panama was a feat in itself, and a threat to your life as well, trying to get across there. But in the 1850s, they were had the opening of the Panama Railroad. And this was pushed by Cornelius Vanderbilt, people like George Law, to really make this more of a pleasure to go from east to west. And these people had money, obviously, with all the gold flowing out of California. So they actually funded or were able to get the Panama Railroad completed in 1855. And it's, it's kind of a smaller locomotive and it would have 9 passenger cars and 1 baggage car. But it was a 48-mile train ride. And obviously much better than going by pack mule, river. I'm sure it was a delightful change. Now this is a luggage tag that was recovered from the sinking of the SS George Law. Just to show it's kind of interesting when they bring artifacts up, it really tells the human side. And that's, we will talk about coins. I love coins. But I also love the human side of these shipwrecks. And a luggage tag is, obviously that belonged to someone's luggage. All right, so here's the side view of the SS George Law, and you can see highlighted in yellow is where the ship's locker was. And the ship's locker is, obviously, by using yellow, that's where the gold was on the ship. This is a recovered artifact from the sinking of the SS George Law, which was renamed the Central America. Now, I think you may be able to see there are some initials on these keys, and these were the purser's keys. And right here it says SL, which would be ship locker, and then the name of the purser. So these were recovered from the seafloor. The ship sank in the Atlantic Ocean off of South Carolina in about 7,200 feet. But these were the keys that opened the cage that the gold was kept on the ship. And there was 2 tons or more of gold on this ship, which is quite a lot. Now this is a key from the Atosha. This is a key I own. I think it's pretty cool. I don't know if it opened the ship's locker, but probably opened my cabin or my, if I had a treasure chest or something on the Atosha. But it's still, the point I think showing the 2 sets of keys is how similar they still look, even though hundreds of years have passed. So it's really quite interesting. So this is a ticket, and this ticket was recovered. They had all the tickets, in the safe on the Central America, and when they opened up the purser's, wallet, they found these individual tickets, and this is conserved, and you can see it's pretty interesting how the steamship tickets looked in 1850. But certainly the ship had first class, second class, and steerage. Still a lot of money back in 1850 to have a steerage ticket for $150. But these steamship ships were carrying wealthy people. They were carrying their own money in carpet bags. So there was more than just what was in the cargo hold. There was a lot of money in everyone's cabin. But they were really helping shape the West. So they were business people bringing back their fortune. There were 55 cabins in first and second class, so not a lot of passenger room. The majority of the ship was truly for cargo. The steerage would hold 400 people, double bunks 3 high. So you can imagine you basically are sleeping next to somebody you may or may not know. And as I mentioned, there would be a lot of times 800 to 1,000 people on the ship. So they were probably having to sleep in shifts in steerage to accommodate that many people on board. And there was a crew of 50 on the ship as well. Now this is as I say, I really like the human side of a shipwreck. And this young lady is a picture that was recovered from the ocean floor. And it very much is the pose of the day. Her dress, her necklace, her brooch, really puts the time in the time capsule, which is really what a shipwreck is. Now, as I show you the next picture, this is how it was found in situ or on the ocean floor. And the perspective here, which is very important, which is where Key West starts to come into the story, is what surrounds the picture, okay? And she is in literally a lump of coal or a pile of coal. And And that's a really dramatic picture, because when they had to excavate the ship, they had to remove all the overburden. So they were having to remove all of this coal to get what was underneath it. Coal's density is a little similar to water, but it would definitely float. So this would go up and then cover perhaps the contents underneath. Now this is my first coin photo. These are scattered gold coins, US $20 gold pieces. Now the other items are the daguerreotypes, which is what that previous young lady's picture was in. It was basically the photography of the 1850s. They were mirror-like, highly polished silver plate photographs that were both kind of a dual negative and a positive appearance if you had turned them. But they were typically, this type of photograph was housed in a protective hinge case. So they're very, very indicative of the period, which is how we date shipwrecks, when there are specific items of the time. Now this is a brief timeline. I'll kind of highlight a couple things, but this is the lifespan of the SS George Law. It was built and went into service in 1853. It had a total of 44 voyages. The voyage that is important to Key West is voyage number 33. And the crazy thing is that the passengers almost had as much gold as the cargo hold. And these were people that were literally having carpet bags of gold in all forms and fashion, whether it's dust, coins, bricks, and they were basically having it with them. Now, they could put it in the ship's locker and get a receipt, but a lot of them weren't as trustworthy, and they would just keep it in their cabins. Now, the captain of the SS George Law, which then became the Central America, is a U.S. Navy Captain William Lewis Herndon. And if you're familiar with anything about the state of Virginia, there's a city named after him. And he is a famous U.S. naval captain. And he was the captain who went down with the ship. Now, as I mentioned, this ship went every 2 weeks, so it was on a very tight schedule. They would have steamer day in New York. So it would be just like in the Titanic. The ship was had an imposing presence, and people were obviously going back and forth. Now, when the ship sank, because of its large size, it really had an impact on the bottom, because it was quite large, four-story building basically collapsing, and then it just all imploding on itself, which certainly makes it like an open book when it goes like that. But here's the voyage we're going to talk about with Key West, and as I mentioned, the treasure. All right, so let me introduce a very important character in our story tonight, and this would be Governor Peter Burnett. He was the first governor of California, early 49er, and he was a successful businessman. He was a banker, a developer, and he did retire early. I mean, he retired, he became governor in 1849, and he resigned in 1859 after much ridicule because of his views on exclusion laws of basically banning blacks. So it's interesting, well before the Civil War, there were negative connotations if you would sponsor laws like that. And the reason Californians were against it is they needed labor. And excluding, a labor force was really the reason that he was, asked to resign. Now, his connection to our story tonight is he was a passenger on the SS George Law, voyage 33, and he wrote a diary. So I have some very nice quotes from him about the visit to Key West and the journey that ensued. And this is the book he wrote, Reflections of an Old Pioneer by Peter Burnett. All right, so this is the SS George Law on a typical entrance to Havana Harbor. However, on voyage 33, things changed. Now, a ship would enter harbor and then it would drop anchor, and then they would ask permission to come, ashore or to the coaling station. But they were informed that there was a yellow fever outbreak, and they were not allowed to fuel in Havana. So Captain Herndon made the decision to turn the ship around and head to Key West. Now, in the 44 voyages of the SS George Law, this is the only time it came to Key West, which I think is epic and very interesting as well. So this is a kind of a cut out of a picture that some of you may be familiar with. This is a map of Key West from, I think it's 1884. It's very interactive. You can zoom in, zoom out. It's got a legend, and you can really see quite a lot of very intricate detail. Now, the map looks almost too good, okay, because everything looks neat, tidy, clean. And if you can see in the picture, I highlighted 2 steamships. Okay, so this is a period of Key West where obviously steam was in use, and Key West needed to provide the fuel for those type ships. Now, let me bring over here, and over here, just to orient you, this is the custom house right here. This is a naval depot, but over in this area here is where the TIF chandler or commissioned merchant agent would have all of their buildings, and they had quite a large area. Now, when you look at this, it looks very clean and tidy. Now, if you know anything about coal is very dirty, very dusty. So I was, certainly curious of why it looks so nice. But this was TIFT. It was a known entity in early Key West in the 1850s. Tom Hambright helped me with some of this research, getting the specifics on this, because I think that is important to the story. So now I have this dish here, which is a pencil drawing by an artist dated 1862. So we're much closer to the time that the SS George Law visited Key West. Now I want to point out a few things. You can see here that this is the TIF building, okay, which is basically the Wreckers Museum. I think is the design was pulled, from this building to that museum. And over here is the TIFT area that I pointed out on that previous map. And I believe this is where the custom house is being indicated by that. Now, if you look at this word right here, and I'll tell you what it is, it may be hard for you to see, but it says coal, all right? So obviously, this looks like right here, looks like the coaling area of the TIFT, yard. Now, it looks like there is a little bit of a retaining wall here. There looks like there's some loose things here. So I believe that this artist is showing us the coaling station at Key West, which is really interesting to have a bird's eye view like this, showing where a ship like the SS George Law would pull up to that dock. You can see kind of a door here, and they would just load the coal onto the steamships. So I think it's the only picture I could find, and I thought it was a really, just being an artist sketch, I thought it was pretty neat to be able to find something that is very specific to what it looked like. And it looked like the coal was in just a big pile. Coal would be kept outside. They wouldn't put it in some areas may put it in a storehouse, but typically it would be outside, because when you transport coal, either by rail, it's open rail, so it's fine for it to be outside. Now, I also have another picture of the, that TIFT building, so you can see it was able to find some evidence of its existence in the archives. So, the lighthouses, deserve certain mention in this whole process of wrecking. The lighthouses really didn't come into existence to after the 1850s, except for the top and the bottom. So you have Cape Florida and Key West that were lit early in the 1825s, but everywhere else was kind of scattered and lingered. So you can see by the dates, a lot of the other lights weren't in service. And what they used along the Keys, which is obviously what they could do, is they used day marks. So if you went to any of these other locations, Sombrero or Alligator, they basically would post in a news or a periodical what the color on the weather vane on that post would look like. So if you were sailing during the day, you could identify your location based on, as this says, basically it would be colored with a letter. They were painted black, white, and red, combined with various features to help the captain identify the day mark. So really, lighthouses were just coming of age. And wreckers, of course, they didn't like lighthouses. They always said those damn lights, because it, if anything, affected their business. But that's always the old adage, trying to make things safer, but the wrecking industry obviously began to decline after the lighthouses came into effect. Now, this is an artist's drawing of the SS George Law, and it brings us a little bit closer. You know, once we've done the fueling in Key West, then of course the ship leaves Key West and heads, you know, toward New York. But just to show you geographically where we will be going in a few minutes with the story, is the George Law goes north, and we have at the bottom here Alligator Reef, and then circled here Pickles Reef, which will come into the story in just a few minutes. But this, the Upper Keys, where I'm from. Now, I'm talking about navigation. You know, we obviously have another comparison with the Etosha. We have an astrolabe, and then what the Captain Herndon used, which was an octant. Now, you may think of a sextant, but he actually used an octant, which is just a different variation on the angle. And these were very interesting and more, actually, you had to be very skilled to use these. And Captain Herndon was actually, you know, he was quite a skilled naval captain. He traveled all around the world leading up to his commission on the SS George Law. All right, so let's get back to Governor Burnett. You know, they left Key West, and in the middle of the night, they develop, they leave Key West right before sunset, and then they head north, and they have moonset around 10 o'clock that night. And the captain, Captain Herndon, who had the most experience, he went to bed. So the first officer was on watch. And what happened was basically he was less experienced. And as they got further up the Keys, and as we all know, there's a curve to the Florida Keys, an adjustment wasn't made to their course. And lo and behold, they ran ashore and, you know, hit a reef up at Pickles Reef. So Governor Burnett was asleep in his cabin at 3 in the morning when his nephew came in and woke him up and told him that they had run aground. Now everybody on the ship obviously was awakened, and everyone came on deck. Everyone thought that their peril was great. But quickly they realized that they were, you know, banging quite, you know, hard on the Pickles Reef, and it was quite loud. And they really felt that there was a concern that the ship could be lost. So what do the passengers do? They all come on deck and they bring their carpet bags. So everybody was ready either to perhaps be saved, or I guess, you know, leave the ship with their carpet bag. But as Governor Burnett mentioned, that the water was very shallow and clear, that he could see as clearly to the bottom as, you know, seeing a carpet on the floor. The captain ordered the coal to be put into the water. So a large amount of coal was put overboard. You know, they were unable to get off the reef. They waited for a tide to come in to see if they could get off. They did many maneuvers they typically throw an anchor forward, and they used a capstan to try to pull the ship off the reef, and that was unsuccessful. And finally, after about 12 hours, Captain Herndon signaled for distress and help. And of course, wreckers by this point are circling any ship that is in distress. So he held and made an agreement with a wrecker to help get him off the reef. And the ship that actually got the SS George Law off the reef was the Joshua Skinner. And as I mentioned, they do various maneuvers, and they try to use high tide to their greatest advantage. And they just gradually were able to put the paddle wheels in motion to make forward progress. Very slow and cautious, but they, you know, all along they were just very fearful that they would just hit another rock or another reef. But eventually they did make it through, and of course to everyone's joy. Now, interestingly enough, when this would happen on a ship, they typically would take up a collection and then actually would, you know, reward the crew for their valiant efforts to get them off the reef. Now, the thing that is very important is, once they got off the reef and went to New York, they had only records of a very brief inspection, and it was right back in service. And there is insurance or depositions after the sinking that they felt that the side wheel paddles, where the side wheel is, that there was a weakening of that, and that's where the water initially came in during the sinking, and they felt that this had a significant impact because it pounded on Pickles Reef for 16 hours before they were able to get her free. Now, wrecking, obviously there was a reward to be a wrecker. The agreement's made before the ship is brought off, and Captain Herndon and the Joshua Skinner made an agreement for $500. And this is what Captain Herndon paid the Joshua Skinner. He gave him 25 of these $20 gold pieces, freshly minted in San Francisco in 1857. These are the premier coins off of the SS Central America wreck site, but this is what and how the captain paid his wrecker. Wrecking was a big industry back then, and there was multiple locations where the wrecking was kind of brought to. Key West was a big location. The other big location was actually Indian Key, up my way, and there was also Port Monroe and Key Vaca. But there's a clear rise and fall, a lot of regulation, a lot of licensing and jurisdiction on it. There would occasionally could be a wrecking court if the captain and the wrecker didn't agree on the price or payment, more so. And once again, there is the condemnation of the lights. But few got rich wrecking. It really was dangerous, and you had to be at the right place at the right time. Because of the way the wrecking industry was, a lot of these wreckers had other jobs. The Joshua Skinner came out of Fort Dallas in Miami and had a regular mail route. So he was serving as a different capacity and then would just become a wrecker if the situation arose. And that would be typical. It's interesting when you read newspapers of the time, and very few listed the incident on Pickles Reef. This one was in a Pennsylvania newspaper, September 16th, which is pretty soon after the event, and listed the reward of the Joshua Skinner, as well as it estimates how much coal was offloaded, which is 80 tons. That's a lot of coal. And this is the only reference I have to how much coal may have been loaded in Key West. So that pile, that sketch I showed you earlier, you can imagine it does need to be a fairly large fueling station to handle the capacity of 80 tons and then still have more for other ships that are coming to port. And then this other one is, obviously I thought it was interesting, it's in January of 1857, long after the event occurred, where it makes reference to the stranding on Pickles Reef. This obviously is the more dramatic headline when the ship sank. Basically took up 5 columns of the front page of the New York Times. And back in the 1850s, they would use dramatic depictions of these natural disasters. And you can imagine this would be horrific if people actually believed this. But it's interesting because they really would use these, and whether it would be Harper's Weekly, Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, and various things depicting these pictures, which really try to evoke emotion. This is a little bit more of a famous artistic rendering, because it's showing here Captain Herndon on the side wheel. Okay, it's showing one of the rescue vessels, which is able to rescue a few passengers, not many. And then basically, it's interesting how it's just showing the passengers in the peril of the situation. Let's kind of go into water a little bit and talk about some coins and treasure. I love the way this picture demonstrates how the coins were very neatly stacked. And that they're neatly stacked like this for a reason. It's because they were in a treasure box when they hit the sea floor. and then the wood slowly was eaten away by teredo worms and basically left the coins in their position that they were in the box. Now the coin of the shipwreck would be a $20 double eagle. This obviously is the largest gold coin minted by the U.S. Mint, and it's close to an ounce of gold. And I put some of the parameters, but it's a pretty hefty piece of gold being minted by the U.S. Mint. And the 1857, prior to the shipwreck, there was very few known, and obviously when these coins were brought up, they basically had a large collection of these. Now, just that 1 year, 1857, meaning San Francisco Mint, over 5,000 of these coins came to light. Now, overall, the gold coins that were brought up from the Central America really were only about 10,000, north of 10,000, which is a lot of gold coins. Now, do a nice little comparison here. This is an Atosha to a Scudo. Interesting to see the design change and the manufacturing change that occurs over the 200-year difference, 200-plus year difference between the coins. But let's talk about treasure boxes. The treasure box on the right is a treasure box from the Atosha. The one on the left is from the SS Central America. And interesting, not much change in 200 years. The boxes are still made of wood. They have seals, both had seals, but not a whole lot of different, rather mundane shipping crates. No locks, no fanfare. But it's really interesting that this part of the ship really didn't change in how they transported coins. Now the SS Central America, the ship locker was secure. I think in the Atosha, where they stored the coins on the bottom of the boat by the ballast, I don't know if I'd really want to go down there, to be honest, because it's littered with rats and sewage. I mean, I don't know if that was their security system, but it was very unpleasant in the bottom of the Atosha. Now, this is one of the tops of the boxes from the SS Central America when they brought up, and one of the main shippers was Wells Fargo. Another name that you would recognize would be Levi Strauss. These were people bringing their money back from California that they were making, supplying the mining camps, or just investing in the development of California. So that's very interesting to see the name on the coin treasure box. Now, one thing about archaeology that's nice is when they bring coins up, it's really interesting to have the spatial relationship of where the artifact was found and where it is in context. So they were able to do this with one of the treasure boxes from the Central America, and this is exactly as found. And what the conservators were able to do, which I think is brilliant marketing, and that also seems to relate to the Atosha and treasure salvers, is they actually took and did a model of all of this treasure box, and then they assigned a position to every single coin. So when the coin was conserved and graded, it has located here the position of the coin in the box. Now, that's marketing is really at its finest, because it is trying to increase the value of a coin that already has pretty significant value. These $20 gold pieces from the Central America are selling north of 10,000 each. This is a particularly wonderful example. Mint state 67 plus. Coin collectors usually scale from 0 to 70, so 70 would be perfect. And there's no perfect 1857 coins out there. But to have this coin be a 67 plus, this is a very stunning coin. Now, for people like everyone else, they were able to make other aspects of the treasure recovery available to just about any collector. There was a lot of gold dust and nuggets on the wreck. My first slide, I think, showed kind of the spectrum of treasure, which would be from banker's bricks of gold to even gold dust. And these are nice little things that can be collected by anyone who's interested in shipwreck treasure to actually have part of the ship of gold. and they're affordable. Now this is a gold bar from the SS Central America. A brick is probably a better term. I've held probably 25 of these, just in awe, basically. I don't own one. But to do a comparison once again with the Etosha, you can see the markings are actually very similar. Differ in some aspect, but similar in a lot. First would be, there's like a tally number, which indicates, something to either the receiver or owner of the bar. They're both have the fineness of the gold listed. You can see here on the Etosha, you have 2X and 3 dots. So that's 20 and 3 carats. And if, like this one, you can see the XX1, so that'd be 21 carats. And on the SS Central America, they do it, 0.905 fineness, which are the same scale. And they also list the owner, and then here you can see Enrata on some of these bars, which they're stamped very similarly, even though 200 years have gone by. And one other is they also both have assayer bites on them where they would test the purity. Here's the one on the SS Central America, and then here's one on this gold bar as well. But the SS Central America gold bars, and these were coming every month, the ship of gold. They would basically be filled with the same amount or more every single voyage. Now, on the bars that were brought up, this was the largest. This bar, weighed 58 pounds. It's called the Eureka bar from the ship of gold. Now, to just give a little bit of a comparison, here's a silver bar from the Etosha, and it's, obviously 78 pounds. But, the Etosha had 900 approximately silver bars. The SS Central America had about 550 gold bars. Now, that's a big difference between the two ships, but still, pretty remarkable that they had that many gold bars. Now, they're all different shapes and sizes. They're not all 58 pounds, but they are really a sight to see. Now, when we talk about the SS Central America, there is a lot of books out there. So I definitely encourage everyone to read, or if you're interested in more information about. You can see the book here in the center is written by somebody very interesting, Tommy Thompson. I can talk about him in a few minutes. But the thing that you can see on his cover background picture is that's actually the underwater image of the side wheel of the SS Central America. But these books, I would recommend all of these books. And also there are auction catalogs as well that are out there where a lot of the treasure has been sold. There's been 2 recoveries of the SS Central America. One a while ago in the late 1990s, and then another one in 2015, I believe. And they have a tremendous amount of treasure. And the stories are just amazing. They found suitcases unopened on the bottom of the seafloor, and they've actually conserved them and opened them, and it's really the ultimate time capsule, in a sense. I will touch base on Tommy Thompson again. Now, if you're familiar with the story, you know who this gentleman is. Okay, he was basically an engineering genius, and he helped with the technology developing the mechanics of an underwater remote operated vehicle, which is how they salvage these deep sea wrecks. So he was really the engineering mastermind behind that technology. All right, so this is an early photo of him after the first recovery. Now he's holding a very special US coin. It's actually a provisional coin from the US Assay Office in San Francisco, and it's what the government did before the mint was in operation, until they could get all of the buildings, the supplies, so they allowed a private company to mint these. And this is a $50, 2.5 ounce gold piece, very valuable, what he's holding. Now the thing that's interesting is he's holding it crooked, all right, if you can tell, right? See where the eagle would be upright and he's holding at an angle? So he's holding the coin crooked. So now, not that I'm saying he's crooked, okay, but look what happened, okay. He really, all treasure stories have, colorful characters, and the SS George Law, which became the SS Central America, is no different. And he was arrested in 2015 by the U.S. Marshals in Boca Raton in a Hilton hotel, and he remains in jail until this day. He is not telling us the location of 500 gold coins that are missing. He says they were at some point in a storage locker in Fort Lauderdale. So, but anyway, that's the gentleman who wrote that first book.